CreativeSmoothie.com. Boost your creativity.
Hey guys, John here from CreativeSmoothie.com. We help you boost your creativity and create impactful experiences. Have you ever wanted to make a good first impression? Alright, how about a memorable first impression? In today's episode, called Find Your DeLorean, you'll learn the key elements of what makes something memorable, inspired by one of my favorite movies, Back to the Future. By the end, you'll take away 3 practical tips that will help you instantly turn your next first impression into a memorable one. Enjoy! I love Back to the Future. Ever since I was a kid, it was one of my favorite movies. I think until now I've watched it hundreds of times, and I still have those VHS tapes. Remember those videos? Remember what those were? I still treasure my Back to the Future series VHS tapes. Maybe it was because I had this idea of traveling back in time. Maybe it was the zany characters that were part of the movie. This Marty McFly, sort of this innocent teenager, and Doc Brown, who was this zany, mad scientist. Maybe it was the time machine itself, the DeLorean, this old car that was unlike any other car that you'd ever seen. It had these crazy doors that went up sideways, the flux capacitor, as well as all these crazy lights inside that made it seem like something special. Everyone here seen Back to the Future, right? Good. And what's always amazed me as I've been growing up is that even after all these years, even after 30 years since Back to the Future was released in 1985, it's still one of the most memorable and amazing movies that I've ever seen. Think about the thousands of movies that have come out since 1985 and the hundreds of movies that you've seen since you first saw Back to the Future. Back to the Future still stands out. An article in the LA Times from earlier in the summer called it an instant classic. 30 years later, audiences are still enjoying the ride. And a poll from last year, audiences named Back to the Future's DeLorean the #1 favorite fictional gadget in all of movie history, beating out Harry Potter's invisibility cloak and lightsabers. So even after seeing the Harry Potter movies and new Star Wars movies, people still remember the DeLorean from Back to the Future. So I asked myself as I was reading up on the 30th anniversary celebrations of Back to the Future coming up this month, October 21. What is it about this movie that is so memorable? Why does it stand out? Now think about first impressions. Think about moments where you have to stand out with the person that you're meeting. Job interviews. Louise and Nadia mentioned that just in the process of going on a lot of job interviews, networking, you're meeting people, speed dating, who knows. A lot of areas where you have to make a great first impression on the person that you're meeting. You have to be memorable and stand out amongst thousands of other people that they may have seen. Now, we all know intuitively that first impressions is important. James Ullman, who is a professor of psychology at NYU, who actually studies impression management, said, you don't get second chance to make a first impression. And he goes on to talk about how, that impression that you make with the person that you meet within the first few minutes actually has a major influence on whether they end up offering you a job, whether you end up partnering or collaborating in some way, and if there's any important things that could happen between us, first impression is what influences whether that happens or not. Another study that was done in 2009, and it appears in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, showed that even what you're wearing, how you're dressed, your posture has a major influence on the first impressions that you make on people. So I was thinking about first impressions. I as well was doing a lot of job interviews and networking and meeting people and researching what it took to make a good first impression. I sort of just found the basic advice. Smile, have a firm handshake, look good, make strong eye contact, be positive. But I couldn't find anything that really helped me understand how I could be memorable. How, after all these candidates that I knew that they were going to meet, how I could stand out and be locked in their mind. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to think about Back to the Future and what makes Back to the Future and the DeLorean so memorable. We're going to break down this abstract concept of memorability and see if we can tease out how we can apply that to situations where we need to be memorable, mostly first impressions. Sound good? Yeah? All right. So let's start with Back to the Future, one of my favorite movies. And I'm going to show you guys a scene from near the beginning. It's one of the most exciting scenes in the movie. Marty McFly has just met with Doc Brown in a mall parking lot, an empty mall parking lot, in the middle of the night. Doc Brown has just demonstrated his time machine, his DeLorean. Out of nowhere, terrorists show up in a van and gun down Doc Brown right in front of Marty. Terrified, Marty jumps into the DeLorean, try and make his escape. So that's the scene I'm going to show you, what happens once Marty jumps into the DeLorean. I want you to watch it and think about, as you're watching it, what's standing out here? Based on what you're seeing, is there anything that stands out? Is there anything that makes you feel certain things? And we'll talk about that after we've watched it, okay?
Come on, move. Damn it. Jeez. See if you bastards can do 90.
So that was the scene. See Marty getting chased by these terrorists. DeLorean goes up to 88 miles per hour. Boom! He arrives in the past. Crashes into a farmhouse. So, anything stand out for you guys from that scene? First impressions. Andrew? What do you think?
He was determined to escape these villains.
He was trying to escape these villains, right? And how did that make you feel when you saw him trying to outrace them in this DeLorean?
Well, I was hoping that it would be successful.
Sure, a little bit of tension, right? Yeah.
I could feel the tension, sure. Yeah.
What about you, Mark? What do you think?
I like the music. It reminded me of Indiana Jones or something like that, or Star Wars. It was very classical but high energy. And I've seen the movie, so I kind of knew how I was going to go. But, yeah, very exciting. I kind of forgot that they pulled out a bazooka.
Yeah, so you see this rocket launcher gets pulled out in the
Thinking
middle.
like, wow, that's pretty serious. You better get out of there.
How did you feel when you saw that bazooka just come out?
I laughed in my head, and then I couldn't wait to see him escape, or hopefully escape.
Excuse me.
All right. What about Nadia?
It was kind of a heroic moment for her.
Okay.
The music was really telling of the moment, how important the moment was.
It really seemed like it was a high stakes,
Yeah.
crazy moment. Anything in terms of the visuals? Mohammed, you're a photographer, visual guy. Is there anything that looked a little bit unique in terms of what you saw?
The flashes was like all of this.
When he goes back in time, you see like a bit of a flash, is what you're saying?
Yeah, so you see this scary flashes coming. It was like all more into his determination to make it happen. He tried until he succeeded.
Right. Wow. What about you, James? It seems like you're on the edge of your seat. You're smiling.
Dashboard, but just the year where he's going to, just to show that.
It was a very unique dashboard. You've never really seen anything like that in cinema history, right? They really made it unique, and to your point, the date just shines at you for like a split second. So yeah, I agree with all of those things. And I think thinking about what makes this scene in particular memorable to me, as I was watching and really looking at the different elements, three things stand out. And you guys sort of hit on them when you were describing what you felt. Number one, to me, it really felt surprising. Everything about the scene surprised me. And I know everyone's seen it many, many times, but it still was surprising to see these terrorists show up right in the middle of the mall at the middle of the night. To see Doc get shot down and he dies. And then to see Marty just make this escape. And yeah, you're right, Mark, the bazooka did surprise me when I sort of saw it come out. And I thought, oh, it's just up against these machine guns. And they pull out this rocket launcher. So a lot of surprises. Even when he goes back in time, you don't really know where he's going to end up. He ends up in this crazy farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. I also found it very tense. So a lot of you guys mentioned that there's this tension. He's racing against time, trying to escape his enemies. Very strong feelings of fear. And then joy when he finally hits 88 miles per hour. Boom! He escapes into 1955. Then there is a bit of uniqueness in terms of the visual look and the setting of this scene. So you're in an empty mall parking lot in the middle of the night. You've got terrorists driving this really weird-looking old Volkswagen minivan, like one of the first minivans. He's in a DeLorean, which is itself a really unique car. I don't know if you guys noticed, Marty was actually wearing a yellow, it was almost like a nuclear-type outfit, and the helmet covers his head. Afterwards, but he's wearing a really weird outfit. Everything about the scene visually is very unique. There's no other scene that you've seen in movie history that has those elements that you saw. Okay? So it was surprising, it was tense, and it was unique. This, to me, are the elements, at least that we've learned from Back to the Future, make up something that is memorable. Then I was thinking about first impressions. I want to make a memorable first impression. And is there any way that I can use some of this stuff to help me be memorable when I am making a first impression? So I'll give you guys a few examples from mainly job interviews, because I found that those were the critical meetings that you had to nail to move forward. Something surprising that I've started to do. Always start a job interview or a meeting saying something completely unexpected that they weren't expecting you to say in a job interview. So something that's going to surprise them. And so you start the interview on a very surprising note. Example, I had an interview where I met a guy and we had walked through this maze of cubicles to get to the interview room. And the guy just looked very haggard, worn out. It was 11 o'clock. And I said, hey, how's it going? Hey, my name's John. How's your day going? And he said, oh, busy. He just looked very tense. And so we sat down and I said, oh, have you ever done any yoga? You ever done yoga before? And he said, oh, no. He looked very surprised to be asked about yoga. That's the first thing that I said. He said, oh yeah, well have you heard of this thing called Kundalini yoga? He's like, oh no. I've been doing it for about a year and it's amazing. It is almost like yoga combined with meditation and breathing. And I've really found that it's helped me conquer my stress and tense and makes me feel relaxed. You should try it sometime. I'll send you the information. And we ended up having a good 2 to 3 minute conversation about yoga. Ended up going spectacular. Tension. Something that I've started to do that adds more tension to interviews is saying something along the lines of, I have a love-hate relationship with blank when they ask you about something. So I started saying, they used to ask me about advertising jobs, and they said, how do you feel about advertising? I would say, I have a love-hate relationship with advertising. And it would suddenly up the tension of the conversation. Everything had been so positive so far, and I'd say, oh, really? How could someone love something but also hate something? And so that line in particular really got the ball rolling in terms of creating this tension between love and hate. It's something that I was really passionate about. At the same time, it frustrated me. And so I found that in particular added a lot of tension to these conversations, which was good. Lastly, something unique. Long story short, I showed up at an interview an hour late. I had walked about 2 kilometers to get to this. It was just a series of bad decisions led me to show up at this job interview an hour late. It was in the middle of the summer. I was wearing a white shirt like this, and so I was completely drenched in sweat, see-through. Sweat was covering my face. My hair was messed up. I literally had traveled long distances to get there. And so instead of apologizing and saying, oh, I'm really sorry, this is just terrible, I really just played up the uniqueness of this situation. And I was like, oh my God, I feel like this is an oasis in the desert, and I feel like I'm some pilgrim just asking for water. Could you spare me a bottle of water, please? It really helped me. And so it just created this very unique impression where it's like they've never had an interview candidate show up so late. It just looked like they were almost on the verge of death. And so that was uniqueness for me. So surprising. Say something surprising to start off the interview. Have an unexpected conversation. Tension. Say something that's going to build a little bit of tension now, where you can talk about something that you really loved and something that you really hated. And then try and find something unique about either the way that you look or about the situation as a whole. I don't care if you've got, a weird scarf that maybe you want to pull out for a certain interview, or, a pink shirt. Try and look visually unique. And so before we end, I want to bring someone up here, and we're going to do, in the next 2 minutes, a very, very quick workshop on them on how they can turn their next interview into something memorable. So Nadia, come up here. Let's get a hand for Nadia. So is there anything that you've read or watched or done recently related to your international ambitions? Like anything? Could be a book?
Yes, I have actually been reading a book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. It's actually a little bit different than diplomacy and stuff like that. It's kind of thinking in broader terms, in terms of how to think about grasping onto an idea, an entrepreneurial idea, and running with it.
Awesome. So when you go to this interview, I want you, when they ask you, hey, how's it going? How are you? Say, wow, just actually finished reading this book called Tipping Point. Have you read it? They're going to say, yes, I've read it, it's great. Or they're going to say, no, what is it? You can tell them about the number one thing that you learned from it. Yeah, it taught me all about how things are reaching a tipping point, and it really made me think about this position that I'm here today to talk to you about. I really feel that blah, blah, blah. So start off your interview maybe talking about the tipping point. It'll be a surprising conversation to somebody who's expecting you to talk about the weather or traffic or something. You can actually have a good 3-minute conversation about this book. You can say, hey, you know what? Yeah, give me your email address and I'll send you the information. Or I have the book, I'll lend it to you. I'll come by again tomorrow. But so there's one example of surprise that you can use. So thank you very much, Nadia.
Thank you.
You're great. All right. Remember, surprising, say something surprising, add some tension, and try and be a little bit unique. And when you think about what you can possibly say or do, think about Back to the Future and the DeLorean. And I hope after today, everyone here can find your DeLorean, find your memorable moment that you can bring into all of your first impressions. All right, so that was Find Your DeLorean. And hopefully you can now see how even just a little bit of creativity can go a long way towards creating a memorable, impactful first impression. Now, I want you to put it into practice. The next time you go into a meeting, an event, job interview, I want you to try out one of the tips that you learned. See how people react. Do they smile? Do their eyes light up? Do they lean forward? Try it out. Let me know how it goes. I know it'll work for you. And of course, if you enjoyed today's episode, you can subscribe to our channel on YouTube, follow us on SoundCloud, subscribe via iTunes, and email. Check us out at creativesmoothie.com. Cheers!
Featuring music mixed by DJ Corey Dawkins. For more, visit djcorey.dawkins.com.